My name is Claudia, and before I married Joel Hartwell, I was the kind of woman who read contracts the way other people read novels. Slowly, carefully, looking for the sentence that didn't belong. I had been a paralegal for 11 years at a mid-sized estate law firm in Columbus, Ohio. I reviewed wills, trusts, property transfers, power of attorney documents. I knew what coercion looked like on paper. I knew the particular grammar of manipulation. The clause buried in paragraph 4 that quietly undid everything paragraph 1 had promised. I thought that skill lived at work. I didn't think I'd ever need it at home. Joel and I met at a friend's birthday dinner in 2017. He was an engineer at a structural consulting firm, quiet in the way that means he was actually listening, not just waiting to talk. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. The proposal was simple: no flash mob, no restaurant, no audience. Just the two of us on the back porch of his apartment in late October, the neighbor's maple tree dropping leaves into the yard, him holding a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I said yes before he finished the sentence. His mother, Judith, did not come to our engagement party. She said she had a prior commitment. She sent a card with a Hallmark verse inside and her signature, nothing else. No note, no call, no congratulations, in her own words. Joel explained her. He had been explaining her my entire life with him. She's private. She had a hard life. She doesn't always know how to show up, but she loves in her own way. I accepted these explanations because I loved him and because I understood that a person's relationship with their parent is its own complicated country, one where the borders shift and the rules are never quite written down. What I didn't understand yet was that Judith wasn't just private. She was organized. She was strategic. And she had been working on Joel since before he could form memories. I noticed the first thing at Thanksgiving, our first year married. We drove 3 hours to her house in Marietta, the same house Joel had grown up in. Colonial style, immaculate lawn. A welcome mat that said, "Home Sweet Home," in a font that seemed to be trying too hard. Judith cooked well. I'll give her that. The table was set like a photograph from a magazine. But over dinner, she said something that lodged itself in a corner of my brain and didn't move for weeks. We were talking about the house Joel and I were looking at in Westerville, a craftsman bungalow with good bones and a yard big enough for a garden. We were excited. It was a stretch financially but manageable, and we'd run the numbers carefully. Judith listened to us describe it, cut a piece of turkey, and said, very gently, "I just worry about you two taking on too much debt so early. Joel, you know how your father was. Always overextended." She said it pleasantly, the way you'd say, "Looks like rain." Then she moved on to asking about my sister. Joel got quiet after that. On the drive home, he said he thought maybe we were moving too fast on the house. We didn't put in an offer. We kept renting for another 14 months. I thought about that dinner a lot in the years that followed. Because that's how it worked. Nothing Judith did was loud. Nothing was a scene or a confrontation or an accusation. It was always a gentle word, a quiet worry, a small question placed at just the right moment. A seed planted in good soil, watered by her son's lifelong conditioning to trust her judgment over his own instincts. She had raised Joel alone after his father left when Joel was 6. I understood that had been hard. I understood it had shaped him. What I didn't understand, what took me years to see clearly, was that she had spent those years not just raising him, but anchoring him to her in a way that was never going to naturally loosen. She didn't want a son who grew into his own life. She wanted a son who remained, in some essential way, still 6 years old and needing her. I was a problem. Not because I was unkind to her or kept Joel from her. I drove to Marietta with him twice a year without complaint. I invited her to Columbus for holidays. I sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts. I was a problem simply because I existed, because Joel had a life that was oriented around someone who wasn't her. The behavioral shifts started in our 3rd year of marriage. Small things. Joel became more hesitant with decisions, more likely to say, "Let me think about it," and then call his mother and come back different. He started questioning things we'd already agreed on. The vacation we'd planned, the home renovation budget, whether to adopt a dog. He'd say, "I just want to make sure we're being smart." But the phrasing, the hesitation, the specific concerns he raised, They had her fingerprints on them. I started keeping notes, not because I was planning anything, just because I am who I am. Dates, what he said, what decision changed when he'd last talked to her. 3 months of notes before I looked at them all laid out and understood what I was looking at. She was running him like a long-distance operation. I am not a therapist. I am not going to pretend I handled this with consistent grace. There were nights I cried in the bathroom with the fan on so Joel wouldn't hear. There were mornings I drove to work and sat in the parking garage and stared at the steering wheel and asked myself what I was willing to do, what I was willing to lose, what version of my life I was prepared to live. I decided I was going to find out what was actually happening before I did anything else. I went back to what I know: documents. Judith, as the named beneficiary on Joel's original life insurance policy, filed before we married, never updated. I found that reviewing our financial planning documents one evening. Not unusual, people forget to update beneficiaries. I noted it and kept reading. Then I asked Joel very casually if he'd updated his estate planning since we got married. He said he thought so. He wasn't sure. He'd look into it. 3 weeks later, I found the folder in his desk drawer while looking for the car insurance paperwork. Inside was a draft, not finalized, no notary stamp of a new will. I was listed as beneficiary. But there was a clause buried in a subsection about asset management during incapacity that granted Judith Hartwell primary advisory authority over financial and medical decisions in the event Joel was unable to make decisions independently. It was not a standard clause. I had reviewed hundreds of wills. That language does not appear in standard estate documents. Someone had introduced that language, someone who knew enough about legal documents to know where to hide it. I photographed it with my phone, put it back exactly as I found it, and sat on the kitchen floor for a moment. Then I called my supervisor at the firm, a woman named Beverly who had been practicing estate law for 30 years, and asked her to look at something for me without asking why. Beverly looked at the document the next morning. She confirmed what I already knew. That clause was not standard. It was, in her words, something a layperson might draft if they'd done enough reading to be dangerous. It would not have been enforceable as written, but it would have caused significant delays and legal complications in any crisis situation. Delays that would have put Judith in the room making decisions. I thanked Beverly and asked her not to mention it to anyone. She looked at me for a long moment over her reading glasses and said, "Take care of yourself, Claudia." I said I would. I did not tell Joel. Not yet. Not because I wanted to deceive him, but because I understood what I was looking at required patience. If I told Joel in that moment, angry, scared, feeling betrayed, he would have gone to his mother. She would have had an explanation ready, something gentle and plausible and designed to make me look like the suspicious, controlling wife. She had been managing him for decades. I had been married to him for 3 years. I was not going to win that confrontation with emotion. I needed more. Over the next 4 months, I found more. A series of text messages Joel showed me voluntarily. He wasn't hiding them, where Judith raised concerns about my controlling nature regarding household finances. I managed our budget. Joel had asked me to. He hated spreadsheets. I found out she'd told his cousin Barry at a family gathering that she worried about the kind of influence Claudia has over Joel, a comment Barry mentioned to us thinking it was nothing. I requested, through proper channels at my firm, a public records search on a property dispute Judith had been involved in years earlier, a matter she'd mentioned once and dismissed as a misunderstanding. It was not a misunderstanding. A neighbor had filed a complaint about forged signatures on a shared fence agreement. The matter had been settled out of court. The neighbor moved away. Judith stayed. She had done this before. Not the same thing, but the instinct to put her name where it didn't belong, to arrange documents to serve her interests. That was not new. I sat with all of it for 6 weeks. I organized everything into a folder. I talked to a family law attorney, not at my firm, someone I'd met at a conference 2 years earlier, a woman named. It doesn't matter. I told her what I had. She told me what my options were. I asked her to be on standby. Joel's 40th birthday fell on a Saturday in April. His mother had planned a party. This was, I learned, a tradition. She threw him a birthday party every year. We were married. She still threw the party at her house, and Joel went and I went with him because that's what we did. There were maybe 40 people. Marietta neighbors, a few cousins, some family friends who had known Joel since he was in Little League. It was pleasant on the surface. Judith had made a cake from scratch, white with lemon frosting, Joel's favorite. She was gracious and warm and the kind of hostess who makes everything look effortless. After the cake was cut and before people started leaving, Judith stood up from her chair at the head of the table. She tapped her glass with a fork. The room settled. She said she wanted to say something about her son on the occasion of his 40th birthday. She said she was proud of the man he'd become. She said she had always tried to do right by him, always tried to make sure he had what he truly needed, even when that required difficult decisions. She paused there. The pause was theatrical. I had never seen her be theatrical before. Then she said, and I remember every word clearly, the way you remember the words that change things. She said that she had been consulting with a financial advisor and that she had discovered what she could only describe as serious concerns about the way marital assets had been managed. She said she had shared these concerns with Joel, that he had reviewed them, and that as a result he had signed paperwork authorizing a formal financial review of our joint accounts with advisory oversight to be managed by someone she trusted. The room went very quiet. I looked at Joel. His face was the color of old chalk. He was staring at the table. I understood then that she had told him something, a version of something, and that he had signed something, probably not understanding fully what he was signing, probably believing he was just agreeing to a review, the kind of vague protective measure a worried mother presents as reasonable. She had been patient with him. She knew how to be patient. I also understood she had done this publicly, in front of 40 people, to put me in a position where any response I gave would look reactive, emotional, out of control. She was betting that I would be flustered, that I would deny it, or cry, or leave the room, that I would do what she expected. I am a paralegal. I review documents for a living. I had spent 4 months preparing for a moment I wasn't sure would ever come, in a shape I couldn't have predicted. I reached into my bag. I do not usually bring a bag to family parties. I had brought one to this party. Inside was a manila envelope. I stood up. I said, very calmly, that I wanted to thank Judith for the party, for the cake, for everything she had put into the evening. I said I also wanted to share something with the room, since we were already on the subject of documentation. I laid out 3 things on the table in front of me. The first was a copy of the draft will with the non-standard advisory clause, Judith's language, her fingerprints on it, highlighted in yellow. The second was a copy of the public records complaint from the fence dispute, the forged signature allegation, the out-of-court settlement, the neighbor's signed statement. The third was a letter from Beverly, my supervisor, written on firm letterhead, stating that the advisory clause in the draft document was not standard estate language and appeared to have been introduced by a third party without the knowledge of the document's primary author, meaning Joel. I said that I had also been in contact with a family law attorney whose card I placed on the table beside the letter, and that I had been advised that the paperwork Joel signed could be contested on the basis of misrepresentation, and that if Judith wished to proceed with any financial review, she was welcome to do so through the proper legal channels where everything we had compiled would be available for review as well. I said all of this looking at Judith, not at Joel, not at the room, at her. She was 63 years old, and she had been running this operation for 4 months, and in some ways for 40 years, and in that moment she looked, for the first time in all the years I had known her, like someone who had miscalculated. The room stayed quiet. Someone's coffee cup clinked against a saucer. Then Judith said very quietly, "Claudia, I think you're misunderstanding." I said, "I don't think I am." And I sat back down. I won't pretend the rest of the evening was graceful. It wasn't. 3 of the neighbors left within 10 minutes. Barry, Joel's cousin, pulled Joel into the hallway, and they talked for a long time. Judith sat very still at the head of the table with her hands folded, looking out the window at the backyard. She didn't say anything else to me. On the drive home, Joel and I didn't speak for the first 40 minutes. Then he asked me how long I had known. I told him. All of it, the notes, Beverly, the attorney, the public records search. I told him everything in the order I found it, while the highway signs for Columbus moved past us in the dark. He cried somewhere around the Reynoldsburg exit. Quietly, the way he does everything. He said he had thought the financial review was just a precaution. He said his mother had told him I was making decisions about their future, our future, without him, that she had showed him account statements she said proved it. He had believed her, at least enough to sign something, because he had been believing her his whole life. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once. I said I know, and I did know. That was the part that was the hardest to hold. Not the anger, which I had been managing for months, but the grief. For him, for the 40 years of a mother telling her son that his own judgment wasn't enough, that she needed to stand between him and the world, that he couldn't be trusted to run his own life. He had been shaped by that so completely he couldn't see the shape. Judith did not contact us for 11 weeks. Then she sent a letter, handwritten, 4 pages. I have read it twice. It was not an apology exactly. It was an explanation. Her version of events, her reasoning, what she believed she was doing and why. She wrote that she loved Joel more than anything in the world and that she had always tried to protect him. I believe that actually. I believe she meant it. People who cause the most damage often do. We went to couples counseling. We started 2 weeks after that drive home, and we went every week for 14 months. Our therapist, a man who reminded me somehow of a retired librarian, asked good questions and waited a long time for the answers. Joel started individual therapy 4 months in. He has been in it since. There were nights when I wasn't sure we were going to make it. I want to be honest about that, because the version of this story where everything resolves cleanly feels dishonest. There were conversations I didn't know how to finish. There were mornings when the distance between us felt like something structural, load-bearing. But we kept showing up, both of us, separately and together. What changed was not dramatic. It was slow and deliberate and sometimes boring, the way real repair tends to be. Joel started making decisions, small ones first, then larger ones, without calling his mother in between. He started trusting what he thought before asking what she thought. He started, over time, to recognize the particular quality of her doubt when it showed up in his own head, wearing his own voice. He set a boundary with her eventually. They had a conversation I was not present for, and he came home afterward and sat at the kitchen table and looked like he'd run a long race. He said he had told her that any future contact with me would need to go through him, and that any future documents involving our shared life were off limits to her input. He said she had cried. He said he had stayed. That it had been one of the hardest things he had ever done. I believe that too. Judith and I are not close. We see her twice a year, the same schedule as before, and we keep the visits structured. She has not, as far as I can tell, repeated what she did. Whether that's because she's changed or because she knows now I will be watching, I genuinely don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter. What I know is this: I could have left. At any point in those 4 months, I could have decided the architecture of their dynamic was too deep and too old for me to survive inside it. I made a different calculation. Not because I am unusually patient or particularly brave. I am neither of those things. But because I believed Joel, underneath all of it, was someone who, if he could see the structure clearly, would choose differently. I was betting on that. On him. I think about it now sometimes, driving to work in the early morning when the highway is quiet and the light is that particular gray-pink that exists for 20 minutes before the day gets going. I think about what it costs to stay and what it costs to leave and how neither one is free. I think about the draft will with the highlighted clause and the 40 people in that dining room and Joel's face when I stood up. I think about the fact that he enrolled in a course last spring, a behavioral economics class at the community college of all things. He comes home on Tuesday nights with printouts and he wants to talk about whatever they discussed. He seems in those moments like someone discovering that his own mind is a place worth spending time. I still keep notes, not about him, not about Judith, just about my own life, my own observations, old habits. I still read every document slowly. I still look for the sentence that doesn't belong. There's something nobody tells you about being the person who stays. People talk about leaving like it's the brave thing, the self-respecting thing, the thing a woman with any sense would do. And maybe sometimes it is. I'm not here to argue with someone else's math on that. But staying deliberately, Staying with your eyes open. Staying because you made a calculation and you believed in it. That takes something too. A different kind of something. What Judith did to Joel wasn't dramatic the way people imagine abuse to be dramatic. There was no shouting, no obvious cruelty, no moment you could point to and say, there, that's the thing. It was quieter than that and older than that, and that's what made it so hard to fight. You can't argue against a lifetime. You can't hand someone a document that proves their mother conditioned them to doubt themselves since the age of 6. All you can do is be present and patient and honest. And then be those things again the next day, and the day after that, and hope it accumulates into something. I think about cause and effect a lot, not in any mystical sense. Just the plain, observable fact that what we do compounds. Judith spent 40 years planting doubt in her son, and the harvest of that was a man who couldn't trust his own judgment, who handed over his signature to a document he didn't fully read, who sat at a birthday table and looked at the tablecloth while his wife stood up alone. That was the yield of her choices, not a punishment handed down from anywhere, just the natural result of what she'd been cultivating. And my choices compounded too. 4 months of notes. 4 months of patience when I wanted to react. 4 months of trusting that evidence was more durable than emotion, that the truth laid out calmly in a manila envelope would outlast any scene I might have made in anger. I don't think I was noble. I was scared and I was strategic, and I was operating on the edge of what I could hold. But I kept choosing the thing that would matter later over the thing that would feel good right now. That matters. That kind of discipline is not glamorous, but it is, I think, the actual substance of integrity. Not the dramatic moments, but the 100 quiet choices that make the dramatic moment possible. Joel is still working on himself. He will probably always be working on it, and I mean that without any contempt. The things that get built into us in childhood don't dismantle quickly or cleanly. What I watch in him now is the effort, the Tuesday nights with his printouts, the way he'll sit with a decision for a day before making it, the way he sometimes catches himself mid-sentence and says, "Actually, I think I want the other thing." That's not a small thing. That's someone rebuilding their relationship with their own mind. I have a lot of respect for that. I don't know what Judith learned, if anything. I hope something. I think the honest answer is, I may never know, and I've made a kind of peace with that. What I know is that I chose to stay in a situation that was hard, and I chose to fight for it in a way I could live with afterward. I kept my ethics intact. I used what I knew. I told the truth in a room full of people who were watching to see what I would do. What I would do was reach into my bag. That's the only answer I've ever had, really. When things get hard, when someone is counting on you not knowing what you know, not seeing what you see, you reach into whatever you've been quietly building and you put it on the table, calmly, clearly. And then you sit back down,